My name is Kimberly Kay. I am the managing director of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm very excited about our panel discussion this evening. Tonight, we'll be discussing Trump's executive orders, the ones pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we're seeing a year later. Tonight, we have with us Tim Snowball, who is a senior attorney with our Equal Protection Project, and of course, our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson. And I'm really excited to share this discussion with y'all, to share the things that we're seeing and some of our knowledge on this particular issue. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We will be taking panel or questions for our panelists after the program is over. So they both have some things that they would like to share with you. I have a couple of thoughts that I would like to share as well. And then we will turn to questions. You will notice that there is a chat section and also a Q&A section. Please enjoy the chat section. That is an opportunity for you to engage with other panelists, to engage with other attendees. You can do that in the chat section. If you do have questions, though, that you would like anyone here this evening to answer for you, please be sure to put those in the Q&A. So I will be looking at the Q&A section for those questions when we get to that part of the program. So if you have any questions, definitely be sure to put them there. We want to thank you for your support. As always, we do these events for free, and we love to be able to do that. We consider these of educational benefit to anyone interested in the topic, whether it's purely for your own interest, whether you have a vested interest in this, or whether you're a stakeholder and decision maker somewhere in all of this process. So we thank you for your attendance. Of course, everything we do, again, we do for free. And I will put a link down if you find this event to be of value to you or believe that it is a valuable discussion or the work that we're doing is valuable. We would appreciate and encourage your support in the work that we continue to do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Bill, who has a couple of words to say before we get started.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming to this. Very timely. You may recall that around this time a year ago, we did a program about the newly issued executive orders. At that point, they were a couple of weeks old, 3 weeks old, and now we have a year to look back on it. So we're pretty excited about this. Also, my pleasure to introduce to our audience Tim Snowball, who joined us last July. We should have done a rollout of him sooner, but we're doing it now, and we're very excited to have him here. He's got a great background, and he's added a lot, and we'll talk about a little later when I talk what we're doing at Equal Protection Project and our expansion plans. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim. He'll talk to you about these executive orders and what he's observed, and then I'll have some observations of my own.
Well, thanks so much, Bill and Kimberly. I really appreciate it. Very happy to be here. It's a very exciting time, whether you're kind of directly involved with stuff going on with the changes from the Trump administration, or again, if you're just a casual observer. Either way, it's very, very exciting. So I will ask for a request to share my screen. I think that just came through, and then I will have a slideshow I'd like to. All right. So I should be sharing now. Thank you very much. All right. All right. So the topic, of course, today is 1 year later since Trump's DEI executive orders. What has changed? I want to start just with a basic refresher for those of you who aren't quite as legally nerdy as Bill and I. Perhaps Kimberly. I won't judge whether or not she fits that category. But what executive orders are? They're kind of a unique thing for the executive branch. Now, let's see here. So Article 2 of the Constitution, for back to 7th grade, civics, vests the president with executive powers over the government, including the obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Arguably, that's the main obligation of the president. An executive order is a written directive with the force of law signed by the president that orders the federal government to take specific actions. And when you think of the federal government, think the bureaucracy, think the different departments. These back in the FDR era would have been called the alphabet soup agencies, but think of all those agencies that you hear in the news, the DOJ. For example, an executive order might be telling the Department of Education to implement a certain regulatory rule or declaring a new policy priority. Interestingly, executive orders are not legislation. They do not require approval from Congress, and Congress cannot simply overturn them. So again, they occupy a unique kind of niche within our constitutional structure. So we're going to talk specifically about the executive orders that have come out under President Trump. I thought a refresher would be nice, not only for myself, but also for those of you following along. So the first one of these big ones that came out was Executive Order 14151. The subtitle for this was Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. Little known fact, actually, is that executive orders going all the way back to George Washington are sequentially numbered. So if you ever are looking for one, you actually can follow these back. There's been exactly 14,000 up until the present. But this was an executive order specifically targeting the federal government's relations as far as DEI programs and preferencing are concerned. Each one of these executive orders states a policy preference as part of laying out what they're trying to accomplish. So for Executive Order 14151, it was stated that the policy of the United States is serving every American with equal dignity and respect. All agencies in the executive branch were ordered to coordinate the termination of all discriminatory programs, DEI programs, and activities in the federal government, including the federal government's contracting and dealing with outside entities, third parties. Specifically, all DEI offices, positions, all equity action plans, equity actions, initiatives, programs. Again, this is very Orwellian, all of these names. All DEI performance requirements for employees and contractors and grantees. This was the first one that came out from the administration. The next was 14168, the Defending Women from Gender, Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. So this is a gender and sex related executive order. It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female, based on biology. The sexes, according to this executive order, are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. So each agency in the federal government was ordered, and all federal employees were ordered to enforce laws governing sex-based rights based on biology rather than on some type of gender ideology. And of course, federal funds were ordered to not be used to promote these kind of gender ideologies. The third was Executive Order 14173. This was subtitled Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. So this was specifically in regard to employment with the federal government or federal agencies. It is the policy of the United States to protect the civil rights of all Americans and to promote individual initiative, excellence, and hard work. All executive departments and agencies were ordered to terminate all discriminatory preferences, mandates, policies, programs, activities, guidance, regulations, and enforcement actions. And all agencies would be required to enforce longstanding civil rights law. So in a nutshell, hiring would be based on merit rather than group membership. Finally, the last one, which is more recent, actually, the first three came out fairly quickly in the first days of the second Trump administration. This one, I think, came out a few months later, 14281, the Restoring Equality of Opportunity and Meritocracy. It states in the executive order that a bedrock principle of the United States is that all citizens are treated equally under the law. This principle guarantees equality of opportunity, but not equal outcomes. So specifically, the policy of the United States, as far as this executive order is concerned, is to eliminate the use of disparate impact liability in all contexts to the maximum degree possible. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of what disparate impact liability means, disparate impact liability is the idea that someone can be held to have instituted a racist or a discriminatory policy even if they did not do so intentionally, just by looking at statistics and saying, well, a certain number of the population is a given race. If that racial composition, that statistic is not reflected in a given workforce, then there must be some kind of racism going on. This has been a very controversial rule going back the last 40 years, and Executive Order 1428 does away with it. All agencies were ordered to deprioritize enforcement of all statutes and regulations to the extent they include disparate impact liability. So those four executive orders are really the core, the crux of what we're talking about when we're talking about these anti-DEI efforts by President Trump. So there's been responses, and that's the main thing we're going to be talking about. I'll let Professor Jacobson talk more about that, but I think there's probably four main ways that these DEI orders have been responded to. The first was a legal challenge. I'll talk about that. That was actually recently decided by the Fourth Circuit. There has been large compliance, especially among federal agencies. There's been some hiding going on, I think, by educational institutions in particular that have DEI programs they're kind of trying to protect. And then there's been out and out ignoring these executive orders and proceeding with business as usual. So the legal challenge came down fairly quickly after the first round of executive orders were issued. This was in federal court. You had federal plaintiffs, including the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, and they argued that these specific executive orders dealing with hiring specifically were unconstitutionally vague. Not to get too much into the weeds, but that is an argument under due process where if a statute does not specify in particular how it's supposed to operate, then it's void for vagueness and can be constitutionally challenged under those grounds. On February 6th, just this month, the Fourth Circuit disagreed with the plaintiffs in that case, finding that both orders survived constitutional scrutiny. Notably, the court took no position, didn't kind of get into the policy argument on whether the administration's interpretation of anti-discrimination laws are correct. It didn't validate any specific enforcement laws. This was a very technical decision, but the result is that the orders have legal effect and will go forward. Compliance, I think it's in particular, I've got the Attorney General Pam Bondi here. You have had widespread compliance, I think, with the orders amongst the federal agencies for the most part. I have some particular examples here. The Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education almost immediately instructed grantees to cease DEI activities and also work to terminate DEI-related grants. Professor Jacobson will be talking about our efforts specifically through the Equal Protection Project, but I've had many examples where I've been researching a federal program and looked at it and went, oh my goodness, this is extremely discriminatory, only to realize that I'm reading something from 2 or 3 years ago, and the program has since been discontinued with these executive orders. The National Endowment for the Arts required grant applicants to certify that they comply with all applicable executive orders, so specifically enforcing those orders on their grants. The Department of Justice, HAS, and the Department of Education have all engaged in new regulatory rulemaking to give effect to the president's executive orders. And that's something that we've been able to participate with through public comments through the Equal Protection Project. Now, this is a little bit more insidious. You have a group, this is kind of a middle category, I consider. You'll see this at a lot of universities, unfortunately. There's been a widespread rebranding of DEI departments. I think during the Biden administration, that was kind of seen as a badge of honor. You know, you have a DEI department, and they were kind of touting that. And with these executive orders and the beginning of President Trump's second term, you've really had a lot of kind of hiding what they're doing, not really getting rid of it, but hiding it, rebranding it, reframing it. So DEI has been replaced with terminology like inclusion and belonging, inclusive culture, belonging, respect and fairness, opportunity strategy, inclusion, equity, and diversity, Office of Access and Engagement, and you get the idea. There's no real substantive change going on as far as the actual work goes, the DEI work. They're simply playing word games and trying to hide this so that it doesn't look like DEI. And then I think the most kind of egregious part of this is the straight up ignoring. We'll be talking about, I think, several specific complaints a little later during this talk. But especially in my home state of California, I hate to say you've got several pretty bad examples of schools and institutions that have had actual complaints filed against them, simply ignoring them. And I'll give you one example from one that actually occurred earlier this week. So we had filed a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education, alleging that several programs at UC Berkeley, my alma mater, violate the law and are discriminatory. And we actually had a response this week through their student newspaper at a meeting that had happened there on campus, a meeting held by the UC Berkeley Latine. I don't know if that's a typo on their part. That's actually a new word they're trying rather than Latino or Latina, but Latine Caucus Interim Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion, Fabrizio, and that's a real title, I guess. It's a great job if you can get it. Downplayed a complaint submitted by EPP, and this was another statement by one of his colleagues. We've gone through this before. Sunny Lee said, and this is the goal for a lot of these attacks is to create stress. So I guess she didn't have a legal argument to make, but this creates stress. Meha himself called the complaint nonsense and told staff of the targeted organizations to continue operating as they had done previously. So even though they have this very serious federal complaint against them, they're simply telling their departments, their DEI departments, to continue as usual and not to change much of anything, which is really unfortunate. And I think that they're, inviting further action. So, quick conclusion before I pass it off to Professor Jacobson. I think over the past year, there's been major progress in rolling back harmful and illegal DEI programs. When you compare President Trump's administration to the previous administration, I think the difference is really night and day. And a lot of what President Trump has been trying to do is undo previous damage. But there's still obviously plenty of work to be done, especially with those programs that are kind of trying to hedge and change titles and move around or just out and out violate the law. So I think in the future, agencies are going to have to continue enforcing the orders, but especially for groups like the Equal Protection Project, we're going to have to continue our work rooting out the DEI cancer wherever it may exist. And for that, I'll let Professor Jacobson talk more about what we've been doing. If anybody ever has any questions for me, here's my contact information, and I'd love to speak to you about whatever you're experiencing. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tim, for that summary of where we are. I will note my favorite rebranding comes from, I guess, my favorite university, Cornell. Not only have they changed diversity, equity, and inclusion to understanding and belonging, the Office for Diversity Hiring Initiatives has now been turned into the Office of Academic Discovery. You can't really make this stuff up. And that's what we're facing. We are facing a situation where the aggressiveness of the Trump administration, at least at the executive order level, and to some extent the enforcement level, has caused people to hide. There's rebranding, which is changing the names. There is hiding things. One of the things the Equal Protection Project we have definitely noticed is that web pages are being taken down. You could almost hear the clicks taking down web pages soon after the 2024 election because they knew what was coming. They are putting increasingly material that they used to brag about and was open to the public on the internet. They're putting it behind login walls. So there is a wide range of evasiveness. Um, One of the things our approaches, and people who've been following us understand this, is that we do not view this as really a fight over a particular program or even, frankly, a fight over education. We view it as a fight to save the country. And this goes back to the earliest days when we first started criticalrace.org, not to mention later Equal Protection Project, that if you wanted to destroy the country, what would you do differently than they have done to our education system? What would you do differently than turning students against each other based on their skin color, against their teachers based on skin color, and frankly, against their country based on skin color or what they claim skin color is? So we take this extremely seriously. Our approach has been at the Equal Protection Project to fight this, to use an analogy, house by house, street by street. There is a publication that's the premier publication in higher education, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and they did a profile of me and a profile of our efforts against DEI and said that we are committed, quote, committed to rooting out race consciousness from higher education, one program at a time. And that's pretty much what we've been doing. I heard an analogy. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I heard somebody use a description, and I won't say who it was because it wasn't for attribution, but I thought it was very appropriate. That the result of Students for Fair Admissions, the so-called affirmative action case, and related cases, is that we have won the air war. And on a legal basis, we control the air. We control the legal grounds, but we don't control the ground. And the ground war against DEI is really the challenge moving forward, getting compliance, because by and large, no matter what they're doing, schools are not complying with Students for Fair Admission. They are not complying with the Equal Protection Clause protections that are at the heart of that decision. And so now we're going literally school by school. We're now up to, and these may be a little out of date, we might be a little higher right now. At Equal Protection Project, we've challenged 207, this was as of the end of last year, 275 schools regarding over 750 programs and scholarships, resulting in 40 federal investigations and over 175 what we call wins and impacts. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish those two. If a school has officially ended a program and entered into an agreement as a result of one of our complaints to terminate discriminatory eligibility, that's clearly a win. In other times, they take it down, and it's a little hard to know whether it's really finished or not, and that's an impact. So that's what we've been doing, and we've been going school by school, program by program. We have made extensive use of various administrative agencies, not just the Department of Education, but increasingly the Department of Justice. We filed numerous complaints in the last 2 months there. Health and Human Services, we filed a complaint, and we're expanding those. Just some examples of the results, and this is why it's so important to go school by school. One of the first things we challenged was Missouri State University had a business boot camp, which was open to everybody except for white males. Providence Public School District, we filed a complaint regarding the Educator of Color loan forgiveness program, which they didn't even try to hide it. If you were non-white teacher, you got special benefits that you did not get if you were white. That resulted in a final determination by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, finding likelihood of discrimination, and the Department of Justice actually filed a federal court lawsuit. University of Tennessee, Knoxville, a red state with legislation banning DEI in public universities. We found it there. They pulled it off the website. And we could go on and on. University of Rhode Island, we challenged almost 50 different discriminatory scholarships. Arkansas, Iowa Regents universities. We really established what I think is a groundbreaking and expanding effort regarding discrimination against American-born students. If you have a scholarship that is only open to DACA and quote-unquote undocumented students, that means you have excluded any American-born student. Department of Education opened a group of investigations based on our complaints last summer to a lot of fanfare. And so that is what we've been doing. And it's really a fight in the trenches. It's a fight to get them to comply. And it's not easy. And I don't want to kid you about that, because they are hiding stuff, and they are concealing it, and they are trying to word around it. We've also challenged programs involving outside entities, like a joint program between Harvard and AVSCME, which is the Municipal Workers Union, that was only open to students of color. We filed that at Department of Justice. We filed at HHS a challenge to the American Academy of Addiction Psychology and Yale Medical School, which had a program from HHS which did not require discrimination, but they were in fact discriminating as to who could participate. So this is where the fight is going. It's trench warfare against these programs because the schools don't want to get rid of them. Now, I will say that the Trump executive orders have had a significant impact. As Tim indicated, there's been compliance at the federal agencies. You would think that would be obvious because these are federal agencies, and the chief executive, the president, told them to stop doing something. But we know that some of these bureaucracies are very entrenched. But by and large, the federal agencies have been effective. And that's massive because the grant money, all of the other things that fund the groups that do the DEI and do the critical race and do the discrimination, that's drying up. Now they're fighting vigorously in court. They've had a few successes, more than a few. They've had some successes, but those are going to be short term. As they move up to the appellate courts and obviously to the Supreme Court, the Trump administration is generally winning those fights. So I would say the avalanche of litigation to stop the anti-DEI effort has delayed things, but hasn't ended it. And of course, the price will be paid by these schools when the grants come up for renewal. Because the main argument they've had is that it's essentially unfair without due process to terminate a grant that is in process. Frankly, there's a little bit of sympathy for that because you got a grant, you built up your overhead, you hired people, you maybe expanded office space, and now they want to pull it out from you in the middle of the grant, as opposed to new ones that will be coming up in a year or two or three, which are simply not going to be renewed. There's not going to be new funding. So I think there's going to be a price paid by universities for fighting these things. Going forward, that's really where the fight is going to be. It's going to be compliance. It's going to be sniffing out and investigating what they're actually doing, and then bringing legal challenges to stop it. So I would say that the impact of the executive orders has been significant. I might even say dramatic, but it has not been perfect. There is enormous resistance because people have to realize this is a cultural fight. It may not be a cultural fight in the old way we used to talk about it 20 years ago, but it is a cultural fight because the DEI group identity ideology is extremely deeply embedded in the universities and increasingly in K through 12. A lot of what happened in the universities has already moved down to K through 12. You just need to read the newspaper to know about that. And so that's where we are. I'd say extremely impactful, extremely effective. The legal challenges to the DEI executive orders are slowly working their way up, and the challenges are not, for the most part, succeeding. Some of them are, but for the most part, they're not. And I think this sets up a very interesting year two, now that we finished year one, that we're frankly looking forward to.
Well, thank you for that, both of you. I do have a couple of questions before we get into questions from our participants. So if you are watching and you have a question, this is the time to put your question in Q&A. And my first question is for Professor Jacobson, and it's, what would you like to see the Trump administration do differently now that we're a year into this? Do you have any suggestions or advice or a wish list there?
Yeah, I mean, if there's anyone from the Trump administration watching, if there's anyone who knows anyone in the Trump administration who's watching, um, they need to beef up their Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. The goal of the Trump administration is to eliminate, to the extent legally plausible, to eliminate the Department of Education. You can like that, you cannot like it. But in March of last year, so approaching a year, they laid off half the staff in the Office for Civil Rights. And I think that's had a very negative impact. The people who are there now are very good. We're very happy with them, but they're understaffed. And I understand that the administration wants to get rid of the Department of Education. But at the same time, it has the goal of getting rid of DEI in education. And if you're going to do that, you need a certain level of bureaucracy to handle that so that when groups like ours, and there are others, but I think we probably do it more than anybody, but when groups like ours find openly discriminatory conduct, and I do want to emphasize, of the hundreds of programs we've challenged. I mean, probably in a couple of months we'll be at 1,000. Not a single one of them was challenged just because it was DEI. Every single one of them that was challenged had an unlawful discriminatory standard in the program. And so if you want to get that out of the system, you want to encourage groups like ours to file complaints with your office. But you've got to have people to process them and to investigate them and to take action on them. So what I'd like to see the Trump administration do is within their other goals of ending the Department of Education, do not end the one entity in that bureaucracy which actually was also accomplishing your goal of getting DEI out of education. That's what I'd like to see them do is restore the level of staffing in the Office for Civil Rights, or at least come back to approaching that level of staffing so that they can move on your objective of getting DEI out of education.
I think I'll ask Tim the same question. If you could dial in a wish for what the Trump administration would do differently in handling this, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the tricky thing with these executive orders is that you have subsequent administrations at times come in, and you might have one administration do things that we would say would be very beneficial for enforcing the civil rights laws, whereas a subsequent administration might come in and try to undo it, right? And so it's very malleable when it comes to the executive orders, even though arguably both sides would argue that they're interpreting the same federal statutes. The thing that I would like to see the Trump administration continue to do, and they've already started this, is start taking some of the policy prescriptions stated in the executive orders and actually engaging in regulatory rulemaking and getting those new rules on the books. It's much more difficult process to undo those rules once they've gone through the regulatory process of becoming part of the federal code of regulations. It's easy to roll back an executive order, unfortunately, but what you want to do is you want to bake that in to the system, and it's much more harder to dislodge that way. Of course, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd have Congress take some kind of action, but I think we all know that that's probably unlikely. But again, that would probably be the strongest possible way to get this stuff on the books in a way that can't easily be undone.
Well, and I mean, that leads me to a gripe that I have often here, which is that Congress could codify this if they chose to do so, and for whatever reason, they're just not. Um, is what it is. That's a completely separate discussion altogether, but I would love for them to actually take some kind of meaningful action to codify some of this. And we've seen previous presidents basically legislate through bureaucracy. I'm not suggesting that that's the right course of action. Whether or not that is a good or bad thing to do, I think is a separate discussion unto itself as well, but it's possible. We saw Obama do that with immigration across the board. When he couldn't get Congress to do what he wanted, he went through and made all kinds of rule changes and then pushed it through the bureaucratic state, which then, as you suggested, or just explained, we're able to make these changes throughout the agency that received the command.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll point out is the reason why active agency action by the Trump administration is more important than during the Biden administration or the Obama administration is that groups like ours, we could have filed 50 lawsuits, okay, if we had plaintiffs. This is uniform across the conservative legal foundation sphere. It is extremely difficult to find a plaintiff with what they call legal standing, which means if you're a teacher and if you want to challenge discriminatory rules and regulations and practices in a school district, you need a teacher who is being subjected to those rules. And it's almost impossible to find because they know they will never work again. They know they will suffer retribution. They know they will be fired. And even if it's unlawful to retaliate, good luck. 4 years later, maybe you get some money out of it, but you're out of a profession. That is not true for the left-leaning and leftist legal groups. They have more plaintiffs than they know what to do with. And this is a huge disparity. If a teacher were to challenge a policy they didn't like that was deemed to, whatever you want to call it, right wing, conservative, whatever it is, they will be completely protected. They will get a job at a union. They will get a job at another school district. We have had people could have been plaintiffs and have said, I just can't do it. I'll never work again. And that's why it's so important, if the Trump administration is listening to this, that it's really important that you take action when we bring you things. And when we file a complaint, we give it to them on a silver platter. I mean, Tim does that work, and we have another attorney who does that work. I mean, we don't just say, hey, there's a problem here. No, we give them a 15-page document with screenshots, archived links. It's handed to them on a silver platter. That could be a court complaint, except we'll never find a plaintiff. Same with the student. You can imagine a student complaining about DEI in a lawsuit at a university. They will be hounded on social media. They will be devastated. And that's just not true from the other side. So that's why I say it's really important for the Trump administration to activate the tools that it has through the Office for Civil Rights to take action.
Thank you for that. Another question, and I guess we'll start with Professor Jacobson, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this as well, Tim. Uh, can the DEI problem and related civil rights problems ever be solved?
The shorter answer is no. If by solved you mean make it go away completely. Can it be made much better? Yes. Can it be minimized? Yes. It will never go away because it's cultural, it's ideological, it's quasi-religious on campuses. There is an enormous, what I refer to and others do as the DEI industrial complex. There are so-called non-governmental entities. There are philanthropies. I mean, it would shock you the large foundations that have been captured, once conservative foundations, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Brothers Foundation, are completely funding this stuff. The teachers' unions fund it. So no, it's never going to go away. Um, but I believe if you had the sort of pressure that's on now, and it could be sustained for 6 to 8, 6 to 10 years, you would have a substantial long-term impact because those jobs are going to disappear. As much as they try to rebrand, those departments are going to disappear, and the culture on the campuses will change. If it's only 2 to 3 years, you'll see some short-term impacts, but not necessarily long-term. And that's why, I know we are trying to get as much done as we can, while for the first time in our history, we have an administration that agrees with us on these issues. But no, it can never be solved, but it can be made much better.
And I'll shoot to be a little bit more optimistic, right? Like I don't know if you ever, I'm not one to try to control people's thoughts, even if they're bad thoughts, objectively. But to piggyback on what Bill said, I think that you have seen a cultural, shift, right? In the last year, just in the last year, it's become okay to call out some of this nonsense. It's been okay. People have felt safe and come out and said, wow, that sounds really racist, or wow, that sounds really weird. And I think that, the farther we can push it, obviously a number of years would be great, but the antidote for bad ideas is good ideas. And, these things should be challenged head on. And to the degree that people feel more and more comfortable doing that, I think hopefully you'll see a shift in culture. And Professor Jacobson's absolutely correct. And a lot of college campuses, most college campuses, arguably, it's just kind of trendy to think this way, and you kind of take it as a given that this Marxist kind of worldview of systems of power, and once a light gets shined on it, I think a lot of people who are rational, who can still think objectively, will reject it. But that's part of what we're trying to do, here tonight in our world more generally, is make that okay.
Yeah, Andrew Breitbart used to say that politics is downstream of culture. And I think that's probably true in this area. There was a very heavy push, and I'm proud to say we were part of it, an important part of it, not the entirety of it, but we were an important part of a cultural shift that turned the terms critical race theory and DEI into toxic terms. They run from them like crazy. Uh, can't they? Critical race theory is something they run from, and that was because in the 2020 to 2022 period, maybe into 23, there was a concerted effort to attack the ideological foundations and legitimacy of critical race theory. And it worked. And I think that that cultural shift emboldened some state legislatures to take action. And frankly, it set the tone for when the Trump administration came in to act on that. So I think you can, but it's got to be a cultural shift. And that's why I keep referring to it. When we bring these challenges, we're advancing that cultural shift because as anyone who follows our website or gets our newsletters would know, we don't just file a legal challenge. We always combine it with a media push. And that media push, one, puts pressure on the schools to change. And in a significant percentage of the cases, that's enough to get them to change. But it also educates people. A lot of the media coverage we get is in local media, local TV stations. And it's very interesting to read the comments on those websites, as opposed to the comments on the New York Times, that they're generally favorable to us. People understand that what they've been doing now for a decade is wrong. I don't believe most Americans want people judged based on the color of their skin. And so we're educating and we're advancing that cultural change, which is necessary for political change and change on campuses.
Well, one of the things that this conversation just reminded me of that I think is definitely a cultural victory, which we were able to help produce, is the fact that when we started this several years ago, and we would talk to state level legislators and stakeholders, especially in red states, about how pervasive this problem was, even on publicly funded campuses in these very deep red locations, no one believed us, and we were kind of almost laughed at about this issue because there was this belief that because this was a red state, surely we wouldn't be dealing with this Marxist ideology. But because of our work, because we have been diligent in multiple ways to continue to expose this everywhere, we're not just looking at Ivy League schools. We're not just looking at the largest state-sponsored schools. We're looking at community colleges. Like no one is safe from the EPP reach. And I want it that way. I want everyone to know, or as the kids say, to be on blast, right? Or maybe they don't say that anymore. I don't even pretend that. But I want them to know that we are watching and that no one's safe from this. And so now when we talk to state legislators about these issues, they're aware. They know about this and their tune and their tone has changed, especially in the last 5 years, to where now we have in almost every state there's at least one, if not a couple, of state legislators who are really in tune to what's happening on college campuses and aware of the threat that this kind of ideology poses, and that they are effectively serving as watchdogs in their states. I know we have a tremendous one here in Texas, which is where I'm located. But that's another piece to this as well. We're not just trying to educate the general public. We're not just filing complaints with federal agencies. Of course, we're always looking for plaintiffs for cases that we can make a broader impact in that way as well. But it's also in communicating to everyone involved that has the opportunity to make a difference and to make a change here, what is happening and what our research is exposing. And so we've been able to do that as well. So I want to get back a little bit to something a little bit more specific with the work that we're doing, especially with the Equal Protection Project. And so this question goes first to Tim, which is what's next specifically for the sex and gender issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time for that issue. Obviously, you had the Skermetti case come out, I think, last year that was addressing specifically whether or not these sex reassignment surgeries were somehow sex discrimination. But you actually have two cases right now pending at the U.S. Supreme Court dealing with the specific issue of men and women's sports, right? And deciding whether or not there's some type of claim, either a Title IX claim, which is a sex discrimination claim, civil rights claim, or an equal protection claim under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. At EPP, we were able to participate in both of those cases as what's called amicus. We were able to lend our expertise to the High Court through briefs that we filed on those issues. But having watched that oral argument or listened to it rather live and written up a piece on it after, my inclination is I think the court is probably inclined to rule that there's no discrimination, that treating sex categories based upon biology rather than subjective feelings of psychology is something that's going to become the adopted standard in the United States. And so it was nice to be able to participate in that, lend our expertise on that. But it's going to be exciting to see what happens next. But of course, I believe our tagline for EPP is, root out, unlawful discrimination wherever it may be. So we have participated in these sex cases, race cases, and the other categories that Professor Jacobson mentioned.
Do you have anything to add to that before I have another question?
Yeah, so when we first started this EPP in 2023, actually it's about our anniversary, almost to the day. Uh, we'll have a party next month, I believe. Kimberly can confirm to that.
Yes.
But an online party. So it's been 3 years. When we started, we were focused almost entirely on race and ethnicity discrimination. Um, but as we got into it, we began to see, to borrow one of their terms, it was intersectional, that you would often find scholarships that discriminated both on the basis of race and the basis of sex. So we began to combine those, and then we began to find more. So we've been finding a little bit more sex discrimination cases. The paradigm might be, women in STEM, but we have filed against all male programs and scholarships. So we've moved a little. The whole gender identity, gender identification issue is very interesting because the federal landscape changed. The Biden administration recognized or claimed that gender identity discrimination was a violation of Title IX. I don't believe it was, but that was their position, administrative position. And the Trump administration got rid of that policy. So if you have, but we have challenged several, and I think this may be a growth area. We filed against MIT not that long ago for the women, WOMXN, that's how they spelled it, for the Women in Physics program. And it was open to women or people who identified as women or non-binary. So who did it exclude? It excluded males who identify as male. So if you're a female who identifies as female, you're automatically eligible. But if you're a male who identifies as male, you're not. That's sex discrimination. That's flat up sex discrimination. We filed that with the Department of Justice, not Department of Education. I don't know if they're going to act on it. We're very hopeful they will. But I see that as a growth area for us because that is a form of unlawful discrimination. So I see the gender/sex discrimination area as a growth area for us because of the gender identity issues, which are at their core discriminatory based on sex.
Thank you for that. Which kind of leads me to my next question, which I will start with posing this to Professor Jacobson. How is the Equal Protection Project, which is a project of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, adjusting its efforts based on what we've seen the last year? I know you just explained how we have broadened
Yeah.
our focus a little bit, while still staying in the same vein, because once we got in there, we saw there was a whole other world of nasty that needed to be dealt with. But strategically, how has that changed?
Yeah. Um, so those of you who haven't checked in on the Equal Protection Project in a year will be shocked, and I believe in a positive way, at how many changes we've made. Um, Tim is our second full-time attorney. Our first full-time attorney was only hired in December of 2024. Um, we now have a third full-time attorney, a new chief counsel we'll introduce you to next month. We have ramped up dramatically. We have added more researchers and investigators. We just hired, she just started, a new lead investigator. So we are, and Kimberly, you can talk about what we're doing at the CRT website. We are investing very heavily in expanding our investigatory ability and reach and our research group to support the legal actions that we bring to address the sort of issues Tim talked about of masking and hiding and concealing. The easy days of the low-hanging fruit during the Biden administration when the schools used to brag about this stuff are over. Okay. They're still doing it. The discrimination has, I don't believe, has gone away. It's just not low-hanging fruit. So we have had to adjust by expanding dramatically what we've done. And I expect more of that. And I think what we'll do is next month, I believe we're planning to have a meet the team online event because we've got people I'm sure you don't know about, okay? And you know, that's what we're doing. We're ramping up. I mean, we are apps. Maybe this isn't the best analogy, but I kind of grew up on the movie Animal House. Came out, I think, when I was in college. And you remember the final scene is where they're in the Deathmobile, and as they're accelerating, they scream out, "Approaching ramming speed." That's how I feel that we're where I feel we are. We're approaching ramming speed. And so that's what we're doing. We're just full steam ahead. And, we'll see what happens. But we feel this is the right time and the right place to get a lot of impact and accomplishment.
I completely agree. It's really exciting. It's really fun. It's an awful lot of work, but we're up for the challenge. That's for
Well,
sure.
I'll ask you a question. Tell us how you're adjusting at criticalrace.org, which you're the managing editor of.
Yeah, so we are very, very busy there. We have seen this issue change as Professor Jacobson mentioned earlier. We have seen the acronyms change. I think one of the worst ones that we've seen, one of the trends that we've monitored is a movement from DEI to housing, I guess, whatever would be DEI into accessibility offices. And just so you're aware, accessibility offices include the disability functions. So if you have a legitimate physical disability, some of these things are being housed there on certain campuses, which is blows my mind because being absent of an appendage is in no way the same. But so we're seeing things like that. We have also seen many colleges start hiding things behind login walls. I know EPP has seen that as well, where things used to be just readily available on the internet. Much of what they're advertising is hidden behind login walls. More broadly speaking, though, we have expanded our research where we started off with a database that just looked at critical race training activity happening on higher education campuses or institutions of higher education. We have grown that. We started, I believe, with 200 schools, and we now have over 700 institutions of higher education since we launched 5 years ago. We also have expanded our research because once CRT, the acronym CRT became toxic, then they moved to DEI, which seemed a little bit more inclusive. And as Professor Jacobson mentioned, that's now toxic as well. So now it's more about inclusivity and belonging. We're seeing a lot of belonging. And how they're rebranding some of these things. We've also noticed too that the funding stays the same. They just take a department, they disperse it, and then send the funding to different departments. But more broadly, what we are doing and what we're focused on is to paint a broader picture of how deeply entrenched this ideology is, because it's not just race, it's not just sex discrimination. It's all of these things that are encompassed under the umbrella of intersectionality. And our research is beginning to reflect that. So we're looking at how schools are handling transgender issues. We're looking at how they're handling immigration response. We're looking at how they're handling discrimination response, even how they're handling anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism on campus, because those are just as important and they're all part of the same ideology that is being pushed in multiple facets in education, not just in higher education, but in K through 12. So we have adjusted our research. We have moved um, from just updating the data, which has been a tremendous tool. We've heard from state legislators, parents, students, and I love that our data is neutral enough that the feedback we get is about 50-50. About half the people that respond say that they love it. It's been a tremendous resource for them, and the other half think that we're promoting CRT, which we are obviously not. We are just shining a light on what's happening so people can do what they want to with it. But we have moved beyond simply updating and growing our data set to conducting original research into what's happening on these campuses, really as we notice trends towards one direction or another, and any of what I guess I would call one of the bullet points that falls under intersectionality more broadly. So we've been very busy there. We have also staffed up. We have a lot of amazing research help. I'm just so excited about everyone we have and all the work we're doing. And I can't wait to share that with y'all next month. So that was me, but I'm gonna move
Okay.
on to let's see. I'm gonna start with Tim on this one. In all of the complaints that we have filed, have you noticed that there is a state in particular that seems to be the worst offender?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just my my home base bias, you know what I mean? But California, man, I was ra born and raised here, and I've lived all over. I was born in Los Angeles, grew up in San Diego. I've lived in the Bay Area, lived in the Central Valley. And based on my experience over roughly the last year here working for EPP, it really seems to be flagrant here, right? I mean, we're talking about some of these schools being kind of tricky and hiding stuff and hiding stuff behind paywalls. And out here, like I mentioned, Berkeley, they're just like, no, we're not going to stop our legal conduct, and it's almost a badge of honor. So, based on my own limited experience, Bill has a farther back, several years, but my own limited experience. Unfortunately, I always say unfortunately, we'll have to highlight my own home state here, California.
Yeah, I think California probably is the worst. Now, it's the largest, so we're going to see more because of its size, but there's no question California is the worst. Um, I'd say any blue state is bad, but I'd say just, the higher up the college rankings you go, maybe that's almost a better way to look at it. The higher up you go, the worse it tends to get. We have filed against community colleges, um, both for their own programs and kind of statewide programs. But the lower you go on the totem pole of eliteness, the less likely I think you are to find these programs. Not that they're not there. I mean, we have filed, if you go down the list of universities we've challenged, there are plenty of so-called lower tiered universities. But, the Harvards of the world, the Yales of the world, Berkeley, we just filed one and Tim mentioned against Berkeley. And they're quoted, one of their, I don't know if it was like an assistant dean or somebody in their program said, we don't care. Basically, we don't care. We're going to keep doing it. We've told everybody don't change anything you're doing. Okay. And so, I mean, I think that, the chief executive of the state sets the tone, and obviously Gavin Newsom sets the tone out there. And the tone is, resistance. Okay. That's what it is.
And other racially insensitive things,
Yes.
apparently. So I do have a question from a participant that I think is a great question. How do we push back on a state level? What can people do on a state level?
Yeah, I think that's tough. I mean, obviously, it's going to depend where you are. If you're in a red state, you'll get a sympathetic ear. And there's been a
It
lot
doesn't
of,
mean they'll do anything though, but they will at least entertain your complaint.
well, a lot of red states have passed legislation about DEI and things like that. Um, uh, Blue states, it's hopeless. I mean, New York's getting worse, not better. So I think in terms of impacting at a state level, it really depends where you are. And that's why you're seeing a migration, statistically, a migration to red states. Now, the downside of that is it leaves the blue states bluer. The people who support these programs, you know, and so I'd say it depends what state you're in. Reach out to your state legislators, reach out to your local political parties, get involved. So important. I know it's hard. Get involved in your school district. Okay, that's where the fights are happening. Run for school committee or show up at a school committee and when they have public comments, give your comment. It's so important. We saw this more back in 2020 to 2022 during the rise of the so-called parents movement. People showing up, one person showing up and objecting at a school board meeting can have a profound impact. It's amazing. And so don't only think about statewide level, think about local level. You're up against a battle. You're up against the teachers union at the local level, but that's where I think people can have the most impact.
I completely agree. I mean, and that's always kind of my spiel at the end of these things is to get involved in whatever way you can. And by getting involved, I don't mean yelling at people on Facebook. That's just not going to move the needle. You're probably arguing with the bot in Pakistan for all you know. So I don't view that as being tremendously helpful. But many, many years ago in a past life, I did a lot of grassroots work and grassroots organization. I can tell you, and I know Bill can attest to this too, just on the blog, the craziest things we see news-wise are not necessarily coming out of New York City, the newly minted Marxist New York City, but they're coming out of middle of nowhere Tennessee or even Texas, where just the wildest, craziest things happen. And don't underestimate the value of getting involved at a local level. I live in a very small town, but being involved and letting them know that there are people watching because there is corruption at every single level. It's not just the federal level, and you can't take on the federal government alone. But you can make a difference where you stand and in your own sphere of influence. And the more people that do that, that's ultimately how we push back on all of this ideology, not just limited to the DEI space, but all of the wokeism is that people have to show up. You have to physically be there and you have to explain your point of view and why you believe it to be correct. Because these people need to know. They need to know that they're being watched and they need to know that there's opposition to these to to this kind of thing. Otherwise, nothing will ever change. It just won't. It's the way it works. Um, so I do see something about Red Green Alliance. I will be happy to drop a link in the chat on Red Green Alliance, which is something that we have discussed at great length, and we have actually held several events on. I think we did one late last year on what we called the Red Green Blue Alliance as well. So I'll be happy to share information on that. So to Tim, what do you think the appeal of DEI is for those that support these programs?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I've gone out in my career and done a lot of presentations and speeches, not only at law schools, but on college campuses, talking to undergrads. And you talk about these ideas of stuff that we would take for granted, like limited government. The fact that a lot of these programs are racist or sexist or discriminatory, right? Reverse discriminatory. And you talk to students about this stuff, and it's like the first time they've ever heard somebody not just give them this, status quo spiel. And they've been spoon-fed their entire educational career. And so for me, I think again, it's just I don't know how in depth a lot of the younger generation who are coming up have even really thought about this and are not just taking this as just what they've been beat over the head with for years in education. And so, again, it's the antidote again for bad ideas are good ideas and challenging this stuff head on. And again, as we've seen the past year, people who have gone along with this stuff just for fear of offending what they think is the majority, once they realize that the majority actually doesn't think that way, are happy to come out and say, "Ah, well, yeah, we don't do that anymore. We don't support that anymore. Yeah, that was kind of weird." And so I'm hoping again that this is just the beginning of a longer, sustained pushback as the pendulum swings in the other direction.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's something, if you have attended our online events before, you probably know what I'm going to say, which is that you have to be willing to absorb the blows. You have to be willing to be called a racist. You have to be willing to be called things, even if they're not true, if you really want something to change. Because complacency is what has allowed for all of this to happen. And it's just true. If more people had been vocal about this at inception 10 years ago when we started seeing this. Now, that said, there has been a dramatic and I mean, almost exponential increase in all of this activity, not just in K through 12. We've talked about that extensively as well, but in higher education, almost as if it were sitting on a shelf waiting for some type of event which made it appropriate to bring out and usher in this massive agenda, based at least on our observations. But you have to be willing to get into the mud to a certain degree to stand up for what you believe is right. And it's okay if people don't like you. Like, you just have to be okay with that because, at least for me, what I'm leaving behind for my children and the kind of country and the future that they have ahead of them requires that I do whatever I have to do and get called whatever I have to get called so that they have the best chance at the American dream that we all aspire to.
And as somebody who's gone down and spoken at school board meetings and sent the emails and done the phone call, it can be kind of fun too.
It is.
You
It's
only
really
get 2 minutes,
fun.
usually 2 or 3 minutes to speak, but
Yes.
it can be fun to go up there to the podium and let them know what you think about their policies.
It is true. It's very true. But you have to get involved. We can't keep leaving it to other people to do that for us. We are here. I mean, we work very hard. And if you are interested in supporting these efforts, you can do that. And every single dollar that you donate goes right back into the work we do. Um, and so when you do donate to the Legal Insurrection Foundation or Equal Protection Project, you are partnering with us and helping to further the work that we are doing. So I have one last question and then we'll take closing remarks. If you joined us a little bit late, this is being recorded and we will post it to legalinsurrection.com within a week. But last question, and this goes to Professor Jacobson and then to Tim. Um, how will the 2026 and 2028 elections impact the DEI civil rights landscape?
Uh, 2026 will not impact it as directly as 2028. If, I mean, we're nonpartisan, but analysis is what it is. If Democrats regain the House, there will be an enormous pressure put on the Trump administration, subpoenas, investigations, hearings, um, harken back to his first term. Okay. That of necessity will be a distraction. It won't directly impact what the Department of Education does, but it will be a massive distraction. But it won't change things directly. Obviously, in 2028, based on the current Democrat landscape, um, any candidate will be in favor of DEI, in favor of CRT, in favor of undoing any progress that Trump has made. I think that's just reality. So if a Democrat wins in 2028, I'm not saying all the progress that's been accomplished will be wiped out, but we will be back to where we were under the Biden administration. I mean, the Biden administration was so aggressive. I don't think most people actually realize that, how aggressive they were in pushing this stuff. So I think 2026 is important, obviously, but 2028 will be a game changer for the DEI CRT landscape. And if it is a Republican who agrees with the Trump policies, it may be a chance to completely solidify a lot of the gains that have been made. Because 4 more years on top of 3 more years, in my estimation, will be long enough to affect permanent change.
Yeah, and I'll just as a counterpoint to Bill, you know, The House being taken by the Democrats, I think, would be a huge distraction, but a lot of this work at the agency level can continue. So I would hope that the agencies that are currently putting these executive orders into effect will continue to do so. And of course, the president, when he writes new executive orders and issues them, is purporting to act upon already existing federal law. So those civil rights statutes, a lot of them have been on the books for 50 years. And so the president, if need be, can continue to take action through executive orders, can continue to guide the executive branch. Of course, as Bill points out, the House can cause a lot of trouble in that, but they can't stop it completely.
And parting thoughts. Tim, let's start with you.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I mean, I've been doing this kind of public interest work, my entire career, and some of the most important cases that I've ever brought, the most important ideas that I've ever put into action, have been from people reaching out to me and stuff that I never would have found, I never would have known about if somebody who wasn't directly affected wouldn't have reached out and let me know that this was going on. And so everybody here who's on the webinar, if you know about something discriminatory going on, if somebody in your life, friend or family is experiencing something like this, please don't hesitate. We have a button on the website, the EPP website, that's designed for you to do a quick, email to us, a quick message to let us know about this. And, not only in my career, but some of the biggest civil rights cases in the history of our country arose from individual plaintiffs or individuals who were being affected, reaching out to public interest attorneys and letting them know about it. And so I would encourage everyone on the call to please think about doing that, especially if you know about somebody in your life being affected.
Yeah, if you see something, say something. Okay. Uh, m- Many of the cases we've brought have been from tips. Okay. Particularly in the earlier days when we didn't have much of a research staff. So we encourage that. My final thoughts are thank you all for coming and show up for our Meet the Team event next month. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. We ain't the same Legal Insurrection Foundation we were even 2 years ago. We're
6 months ago.
6 months ago, 3 months, 2 weeks ago. I mean, we have just expanded rapidly. We're optimistic about what we're doing. We appreciate a lot of you have been with us since the start. And I mean that as readers going back to the early days of the blog, 15 plus years ago, to the early days of the foundation. So we're coming upon our seventh anniversary as a foundation, fifth anniversary of criticalrace.org, and third anniversary of Equal Protection Project. And we're hopefully going to celebrate that next month, middle of the month. I think we might have a date, middle to third week in the month.
Yes, so look for that information. And as I said, we will be posting this online. And just as I always want to encourage you, there is hope. We work hard, but we are very happy warriors. We enjoy the work that we do. We consider it a calling and a privilege and an honor to be able to spend our time doing this. I think I can speak for everyone that works with us when I say that too. I think we are all very similarly minded in that, but we are so incredibly grateful for you and your support and your attendance and all the ways that you help, whether it's circulating our information or this webinar once it's posted and your financial support and your kind emails. We are grateful and appreciate all of it. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and look forward to the video and for information on our next event. Take care, y'all.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.